I still remember the antiseptic smell of the ICU waiting room in Denver Presbyterian Hospital, the way the vinyl chairs stuck to my legs after sitting for 12 hours, and the sound of my mother's voice when she finally called me back. "Jessica, honey, you know how dramatic you can be. Marcus probably just had too much to drink. Boys will be boys. Can't you handle this yourself? I'm at Rebecca's art show opening, and you know how important this is for her career." I was standing outside the trauma unit, shaking, watching through the small window as doctors worked on my husband of 3 years. He'd been found unconscious in our garage, carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty car exhaust. What they didn't know yet was that it wasn't faulty, it was intentional. Marcus had tried to kill himself, and I had found him barely breathing when I came home early from work. But my mother thought I was being dramatic. My sister's art show, her third failed attempt at becoming a professional painter, was more important than my husband fighting for his life. That phone call changed everything, not just because of what she said, but because of how familiar it felt, how perfectly it fit the pattern I'd been blind to for 28 years. Let me back up. The day started like any other Tuesday in our quiet suburban neighborhood in Lakewood, Colorado. Marcus had been struggling with depression for months, but I thought we were managing it. He'd started therapy 3 weeks prior, was taking his prescribed Zoloft religiously, and seemed to be improving. His appetite was returning, he was sleeping better, and just the weekend before we'd gone hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park, something he hadn't felt up to doing in months. I'd taken on extra projects at my marketing firm to cover the increased medical bills and reduce his stress about money. Between his therapy sessions at $150 each, the psychiatrist visits at $300 monthly, and the medications that our insurance only partially covered, we were spending nearly $800 extra per month on his mental health care. But I didn't mind. I worked late, took on weekend consulting gigs, and even picked up some freelance social media management for local businesses, whatever it took to give him the best care possible. That Tuesday, I left work early because I wanted to surprise him with his favorite Thai food from Bangkok Palace downtown, pad Thai with extra peanuts and their signature green curry that he always said reminded him of our honeymoon in Thailand. I'd been planning to suggest a weekend getaway to Estes Park, maybe rent one of those cozy cabins near the lake where we could disconnect from everything and just focus on healing together. Instead, I found our garage door closed, the car running, and Marcus slumped over the steering wheel of his Honda Civic. The scene is burned into my memory with horrifying clarity. The overhead garage light was on, casting harsh shadows across his unconscious face. The car radio was still playing, some classic rock station he liked, and the exhaust pipe had been deliberately connected to a garden hose that ran through the driver's side window. He'd sealed the gaps with duct tape, methodically, like he'd researched the most effective method. I didn't think. I just acted. I hit the garage door opener, yanked open the car door, and dragged him onto the concrete floor. He was so heavy, dead weight, and I remember screaming his name over and over while I fumbled for my phone to call 911. His lips were cherry red, something I later learned was a sign of carbon monoxide poisoning. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. I watched them work on him with professional efficiency, checking his pulse, strapping an oxygen mask over his face, loading him onto a stretcher. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, squeezed my shoulder and said, "You saved his life." Another 15 minutes and we would have lost him. They rushed him to Denver Presbyterian while I followed in my own car, hyperventilating, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. I kept calling everyone I thought should know, everyone who should care about what was happening to us. First, I called my mother in Phoenix. It went straight to voicemail. Her voice artificially cheerful. "Hi, you've reached Linda. I'm probably out living my best life. Leave a message." Then my sister Rebecca in Seattle. No answer. Her phone didn't even go to voicemail. It just rang and rang until the line went dead. I tried my mother again during the ambulance ride, then again when we arrived at the hospital. Still nothing. It wasn't until Marcus had been in the ICU for 6 hours, until the doctors had stabilized him and confirmed that while he'd have some recovery time, he would survive without brain damage, that my phone finally rang. Jessica, I saw your missed calls. What's wrong now? Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Not, is everyone safe? Just, what's wrong now? Like I was a chronic complainer instead of a daughter whose world had just imploded. I was standing in the hallway outside the ICU, still wearing the clothes I'd worn to work that morning, a navy blazer now wrinkled and stained with lith. I don't know what, my white blouse disheveled from dragging Marcus out of the car. I could see him through the window, pale and still, connected to monitors and IVs, a ventilator helping him breathe. Mom, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. Marcus tried to kill himself. I found him in our garage with the car running. He's in the ICU. I don't know if there's going to be brain damage. I don't know anything. I'm alone here and I'm scared and I need you. There was a pause. Not the shocked silence I expected, but the kind of pause someone makes when they're calculating, weighing options, deciding how much they want to be bothered. Oh, honey, she said, and I could hear the dismissiveness already creeping into her tone. Are you sure it wasn't just an accident? You know how you get when you're stressed. You always assume the worst. Marcus seems so happy when we talk to him. Remember at Christmas how he was joking around, helping with the dishes? People don't just suddenly become suicidal. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Mom, he left a note. He planned this. He sealed the garage and... Jessica, sweetie, you know how dramatic you can be when things get overwhelming. Are you sure you're not reading too much into this? And you know what? I'm actually at Rebecca's opening right now. I flew out here specifically for this. I told you about it last month, remember? She's worked so hard on this collection, and there are going to be gallery owners here tonight. Real ones this time. Important people from the Seattle art scene. I can't just abandon her now when she needs my support. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, watching nurses rush past me to save other people's loved ones, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking. That was too clean, too poetic. This was more like a bone fracturing, sharp and permanent. Mom, my husband almost died today. But he didn't, right? You said he's stable. And Jessica, honey, you're so capable. You always figure things out. Remember when your appendix burst in college? You handled that just fine on your own. This is just another challenge you'll get through. Rebecca, though, she's so fragile right now. This opening could make or break her career. She's been having panic attacks all week about it. You understand, don't you? You've always been the strong one. The strong one. There it was again. That label that had followed me my entire life, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The strong one who didn't need comfort. The capable one who could handle anything alone. The reliable daughter who never caused problems or demanded attention. I have to go, she continued. Rebecca's about to give her artist talk, and she needs me there for support. But call me tomorrow and let me know how things are going, okay? I'm sure everything will work out fine. You're tough, Jess. You always land on your feet. And she hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Not the suicide attempt, as devastating as that was. It made a horrible kind of sense given Marcus's depression. But this phone call, this casual dismissal of my emergency, this prioritization of Rebecca's art show over my husband's life, that felt like a different kind of violence. I realized, standing in that sterile hospital corridor with machines beeping around me and the smell of industrial disinfectant burning my nostrils, that I had never been the priority. Not once. Not ever. The memories started flooding back, each one a small betrayal I'd learned to accept, to rationalize, to forgive. When I was 7 and fell off my bike, scraping up my knees and palms so badly that gravel was embedded in the wounds, my mother couldn't take me to get them properly cleaned because Rebecca, then 4, was having a tantrum about her favorite dress being in the wash. You're a big girl, Jessica. You can rinse them off yourself. Rebecca needs me right now. When I was 12 and made the honor roll for the 6th consecutive semester, my mother glanced at my report card, nodded, and said, "Good. That's what we expect from you." But when Rebecca passed 3rd grade by the skin of her teeth, barely scraping by with C's and D's, we went out for ice cream to celebrate her improvement, and my mother posted about it on Facebook. So proud of my little artist. She's more focused on her creativity than boring old grades, and that's perfectly fine with me. When I was 16 and broke my wrist during soccer practice, a clean break that required surgery and 8 weeks in a cast, my mother couldn't stay at the hospital because Rebecca was home with a cold. Someone needs to watch her, Jessica. She gets so anxious when she's sick. You'll be fine here. The doctors know what they're doing. I spent 6 hours in the emergency room alone, waiting for surgery, calling relatives to see if anyone could come sit with me. Finally, my Aunt Margaret drove 40 minutes from across town to hold my hand while they put me under anesthesia. My mother picked me up the next morning, annoyed that I'd made such a big deal out of what she called a simple broken bone. When I was 18 and applying for colleges, I needed help navigating the FAFSA forms and scholarship applications. My mother was too busy helping Rebecca prepare for her high school art show, her first real exhibition, she called it, even though it was just a display in the school cafeteria. "You're smart, Jess. You'll figure it out," she said, waving me away when I tried to show her the confusing financial aid paperwork. "These forms are designed for people like you. Rebecca needs help with her artist statement, and you know how much trouble she has with writing." So I figured it out alone, staying up until 2 a.m. night after night, cross-referencing tax documents and bank statements, calculating expected family contributions and unmet need. I filled out 17 scholarship applications, wrote 23 personal essays, and managed to piece together enough financial aid to attend Colorado State University. When my acceptance letter came, along with a merit scholarship that would cover 60% of my tuition, my mother barely looked up from helping Rebecca hot glue sequins onto a canvas for her latest mixed media exploration. "That's nice, honey," she said absently. "We knew you'd get in somewhere." But when Rebecca's art teacher mentioned that one of her paintings showed emerging talent, my mother called everyone in our extended family to share the news. She framed the teacher's comment and hung it in the living room, right next to Rebecca's mediocre watercolor of a sunset that looked like every other sunset painting ever created by a teenager with more ambition than skill. The pattern continued through college. When I called home freshman year, crying because my roommate had been stealing money from my wallet and I didn't know how to handle the confrontation, my mother cut the call short because Rebecca was having a crisis about her SAT scores. "You're mature for your age, Jessica. You'll work it out. Rebecca really needs me right now. These test scores could determine her whole future." Rebecca's SAT scores, by the way, were perfectly average. Not bad, not great, just normal. But they weren't good enough for the prestigious art schools she'd convinced herself she deserved to attend, so they became a family emergency, requiring all available emotional resources. When I made Dean's List every semester, my mother would say, "Of course you did. We expect excellence from you." When Rebecca passed remedial math after 3 attempts, we celebrated with dinner at her favorite restaurant and a social media post about different types of intelligence and how creative minds work differently. When I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in marketing and communications, my mother missed the ceremony because Rebecca was having a panic attack about starting community college in the fall. You understand, don't you, Jess? She's just so anxious about this transition. You're confident enough to walk across that stage without me there cheering you on. I walked across that stage alone, in a sea of graduates whose families had driven hours to watch them accept their diplomas. I smiled for the photographer, shook the dean's hand, and felt hollow inside. After the ceremony, I went back to my dorm room and ordered pizza by myself, scrolling through Facebook posts of my classmates celebrating with parents and siblings, everyone beaming with pride and love. When I landed my first job at a marketing firm in Denver, a competitive position that 300 candidates had applied for, my mother's response was characteristically underwhelming. "Good for you. I knew you'd land on your feet. You always do." But when Rebecca decided to drop out of community college after 1 semester to pursue her artistic vision full-time, that was treated like a brave and admirable choice. "She's following her dreams," my mother told anyone who would listen. Not everyone is meant for traditional education. Rebecca is an artist. She needs to create. The financial support that followed was staggering. My mother helped Rebecca rent a studio apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, $1,200 a month that she couldn't afford on her sporadic income from selling paintings at farmers markets and coffee shops. She bought Rebecca professional art supplies, easels, canvases, oil paints, brushes that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. When Rebecca decided she needed a car to transport her artwork to shows, my mother co-signed a loan for a Honda CR-V and helped with the down payment. When Rebecca's credit card debt reached dangerous levels because she was more focused on her art than on practical matters like budgeting, my mother paid it off, twice. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks, living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, driving a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla with a check engine light that had been on for 6 months because I couldn't afford the repairs. When I mentioned that I was struggling financially, my mother suggested I pick up a side hustle or look for a cheaper place to live. You're good with money, Jessica. You'll figure it out. Rebecca, though, she can't be expected to worry about practical things when she's in the middle of her creative development. Artists need freedom from mundane concerns. The double standard was breathtaking, but it was so consistent, so pervasive, that I learned to accept it as normal. This was just how our family worked. Rebecca was the sensitive one who needed protection and support, and I was the strong one who could handle anything life threw at me. When I met Marcus during my second year at the marketing firm, I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me for who I really was. He was working as a freelance graphic designer then, funny and kind, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. He listened when I talked about work frustrations or family dynamics. He celebrated my small victories and comforted me during disappointments. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and even that milestone was overshadowed by Rebecca's latest crisis. She'd been rejected from a gallery showing she'd applied for, and my mother was convinced this was a sign that the art world was too competitive and cruel for someone as sensitive as Rebecca. When I called to share my engagement news, my mother spent 10 minutes talking about how worried she was about Rebecca's emotional state before she even acknowledged my announcement. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," she said distractedly. "Marcus seems nice. Have you set a date? Because I'm not sure how much help I can be with planning right now. Rebecca really needs my support through this difficult period." Our wedding was a small affair, partly because Marcus and I preferred intimate gatherings, but mostly because I'd learned not to expect much from my family in terms of involvement or support. My mother attended, but she spent the entire reception talking to relatives about Rebecca's artistic potential and how worried she was about her finding her path in such a challenging field. During the mother-daughter dance, while we swayed to an acoustic version of In My Daughter's Eyes, she spent the entire 3 minutes telling me about Rebecca's latest painting series and how she thought it might be the breakthrough Rebecca had been working toward. I should have been hurt. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt that familiar numbness that came from years of training myself not to need more than I was given. Marcus and I settled into married life in our little house in Lakewood, a 3-bedroom ranch with a postage stamp yard and a mortgage that stretched our budget thin but felt like an enormous accomplishment. We painted the walls warm colors, planted a garden, adopted a rescue dog named Buster. We were building something together, a life, a partnership, a future. But even then, the family dynamics followed us. When we hosted Thanksgiving our first year as a married couple, my mother spent the entire day on the phone with Rebecca, who was having a meltdown about a gallery rejection. She barely touched the meal I'd spent 2 days preparing and kept apologizing to our guests for being distracted. "Rebecca is just going through such a hard time right now," she explained to Marcus's parents, who had driven down from Fort Collins to join us. Artistic rejection is so much more devastating than regular disappointment. Creative people feel things more deeply. When Marcus lost his freelance job during the economic downturn 2 years ago, and we struggled to make our mortgage payments for 3 months, I called my mother for the first time ever to ask for help. Not money. I was too proud for that. but maybe just emotional support and someone to tell me everything would be okay. Her response was swift and cutting. Jessica, I can't help you right now. Rebecca just moved back home after her relationship ended, and she's in such a fragile state. She needs all my attention. You and Marcus are both capable adults. You'll figure something out. We did figure it out. Marcus took a part-time job at a coffee shop while continuing to look for design work. I picked up freelance projects on evenings and weekends. We sold my car and shared his. We ate a lot of rice and beans and canned soup. But we made it through together without any help from my family. When Rebecca's latest boyfriend broke up with her because he was tired of supporting her financially while she found herself artistically, that was treated like a tragedy requiring immediate intervention. My mother flew to Seattle, helped her move back home to Phoenix, set her up in the guest bedroom, and spent weeks nursing her through what she called heartbreak recovery. When Marcus finally landed a stable position at a design firm last year, my mother's congratulations were perfunctory. Good for you both. I knew things would work out. But when Rebecca sold 2 paintings at a local coffee shop for $75 each, my mother posted about it on every social media platform she had, calling Rebecca a professional artist and treating the $150 sale like it was a gallery opening at MoMA. This pattern of neglect and favoritism had been so consistent for so long that I'd learned to expect nothing and be grateful for scraps. I'd trained myself to be low maintenance, to handle my own problems, to never need more than my family was willing to give. Which brings me back to that phone call in the hospital corridor. Standing there, watching my husband fight for his life while my mother dismissed his suicide attempt as a minor inconvenience that shouldn't interrupt Rebecca's art show, I finally saw the pattern for what it was. Not love, but emotional abandonment disguised as high expectations. Marcus woke up on Thursday morning, groggy and disoriented from the medications and confused about where he was. When he saw me sitting beside his bed, his face crumpled with shame and relief and regret all mixed together. "Jess," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the ventilator tube they'd removed the night before. "I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." I took his hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Don't apologize for being in pain. Apologize for not telling me how bad it was." We talked for hours that day. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our marriage. He told me about the darkness that had been consuming him for months, how he'd felt like a burden on me, how he'd convinced himself that I'd be better off without him. He talked about the shame of being unemployed for so long, the feeling of worthlessness that came with watching me work extra jobs to keep us afloat, the fear that he'd never be the partner I deserved. "I kept thinking you were so strong, so capable of handling everything," he said. "I felt like I was just dragging you down, like you were carrying me, and I had nothing to offer in return." The irony was devastating. While I'd been performing strength and independence to avoid being a burden on my family, Marcus had been interpreting that same performance as evidence that he was unnecessary, that his pain was too much for me to handle. "I should have told you I was struggling," I said. "I should have let you see that I needed you too, that I wasn't handling everything as well as I pretended to be." He squeezed my hand. "Why didn't you? Why did you take on so much alone?" And that's when I started talking about my family, really talking about them for the first time. I told him about the phone call with my mother, about the years of being overlooked and dismissed, about the pattern of my needs being treated as less important than Rebecca's wants. "Jesus, Jess," he said when I finished. "I knew your family was complicated, but I didn't realize how bad it was. How have you carried this alone for so long?" "Because I thought that's what love looked like," I said. "I thought if I just tried harder, needed less, gave more, eventually I'd earn the kind of attention Rebecca gets automatically. I thought being strong meant being silent." That's when I realized that my inability to ask for help, my compulsive need to handle everything independently, hadn't just isolated me. It had probably contributed to Marcus feeling like he couldn't share his pain with me. In trying to be the perfect wife who never caused problems, I'd accidentally created a dynamic where his problems felt too big for our relationship. We both started crying then, grieving the ways we'd failed each other, not through malice, but through the terrible efficiency of patterns we'd learned in childhood. Me, trained to believe my needs were inconvenient. Him, raised by a father who'd called depression weakness and taught him that real men solve their own problems. Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychiatrist assigned to Marcus's case, met with us together that afternoon. She was a small woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes, and she had a way of asking questions that cut straight through the defenses we'd built around our pain. "Marcus," she said, "when you were planning to end your life, what did you imagine Jessica's reaction would be?" He was quiet for a long time. I thought she'd be sad, but also maybe relieved, like she'd finally be free to live her life without having to take care of me. Dr. Chen turned to me. "Jessica, when Marcus was struggling with depression, what made you think you had to handle his care entirely on your own?" "I guess I thought that's what a good wife does," I said. "Handle things, not complain, not ask for help." And where did you learn that? The question opened something I hadn't expected. I found myself talking about my family, about the decades of conditioning that had taught me my worth was tied to my usefulness, my value measured by how little I needed from others. Dr. Chen listened without judgment, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Jessica," she said finally, "I'd like to suggest something. In addition to Marcus's individual therapy and the couples counseling I'm recommending for both of you, I think you might benefit from some individual sessions as well. What you're describing sounds like a lifetime of conditioning that's affected not just your family relationships, but your marriage too." I was resistant at first. I wasn't the one who'd attempted suicide. I wasn't the one with a mental health diagnosis. I was fine. I'd always been fine. That was the whole point. But Dr. Chen was gentle and persistent. "Being fine isn't the same as being healthy," she said. "And sometimes the people who appear to be handling everything are the ones who need the most support." Marcus squeezed my hand. "I think it's a good idea, Jess. I think we both need to learn how to take care of ourselves so we can take care of each other." So I agreed, tentatively, to try therapy. Not because I thought I needed fixing, but because I was finally starting to understand that our marriage needed both of us to be whole, not just functional. Meanwhile, the silence from my family was deafening. 3 days after Marcus's suicide attempt, after I'd called and texted with updates that went unanswered, Rebecca finally responded. A single text. "Mom told me what happened. Hope Marcus is feeling better soon. BTW, my opening went really well. Sold 3 pieces. No questions about how I was doing. No offer of support. No acknowledgement that I might be struggling too. Just a perfunctory expression of hope, followed immediately by news about her art sales." I stared at that text for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of clarity I'd never experienced before. This was who they were. This was who they'd always been. And no amount of crisis or trauma or desperate need on my part was going to change them. My mother called 2 days later, not to check on Marcus or offer support, but to update me on Rebecca's post-opening success. "Jessica, you'll be so proud of Rebecca. She sold 3 paintings at her show, and one of the gallery owners wants to meet with her about a potential solo exhibition. This could be her big break." She talked for 15 minutes about Rebecca's triumph before casually asking, "Oh, and how's Marcus doing? Is he feeling better?" "He's in intensive psychiatric care," I said. "He's starting a new medication regimen and will need months of therapy. We're looking at a long recovery process." "Well, I'm sure he'll be fine," she said dismissively. "Young people are so resilient, and you're so good at taking care of things. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you something. Rebecca is thinking about moving back to Seattle now that her art career is taking off, but she'll need help with the security deposit and moving expenses. I was wondering if you and Marcus might be able to contribute something? Just a few thousand to help her get established. You know how important it is to support family." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. My husband had nearly died 3 days ago. We were facing thousands of dollars in medical bills. I'd used up all my sick days and vacation time sitting by his hospital bed, and she was asking me to fund Rebecca's latest adventure. "No," I said. "What?" "No. We can't help with Rebecca's moving expenses. We're dealing with a medical crisis and financial strain from Marcus's hospitalization. There was a pause. Jessica, honey, I understand you're stressed, but this is important. Rebecca has momentum right now, and we need to support her while she has this opportunity. You and Marcus both have stable jobs. You can afford to help. Mom, my husband tried to kill himself. We're in debt from medical bills. I'm not giving Rebecca money for an apartment. Her voice turned sharp. That's very selfish of you, Jessica. Family helps family. I've helped you plenty over the years. When? The question came out harsher than I intended. When have you ever helped me? I raised you, didn't I? I fed you and clothed you and gave you a home. I taught you to be independent and capable. That's worth something. You did the bare minimum of parenting and then acted like I owed you gratitude for it. There's a difference between raising a child and actually supporting them. She hung up on me. That night, lying in bed next to Marcus, who was finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, I started making a list on my phone. Not a to-do list or a grocery list, but an inventory of all the ways my family had failed me. All the times I'd needed them and they weren't there. All the crises of Rebecca's that had been prioritized over my actual emergencies. The list was longer than I expected. Pages and pages of memories I'd suppressed or rationalized or forgiven. By the time I finished, it was 3 a.m. and I was crying quiet tears onto my pillow. But I also felt something I'd never experienced before. Permission. Permission to be angry. Permission to acknowledge that what had happened to me wasn't normal or acceptable. Permission to stop making excuses for people who had consistently chosen to treat me as less important than my sister. The next morning, I called Dr. Martinez, the therapist Dr. Chen had recommended. Her first available appointment was the following week, but she spent 20 minutes on the phone with me, talking me through some immediate coping strategies and assuring me that what I was feeling was valid. Trauma isn't just big, dramatic events, she said. Sometimes it's the accumulation of smaller wounds over time. Death by 1,000 cuts. It sounds like you've been bleeding for a very long time. That phrase, death by 1,000 cuts, stayed with me. It felt like the most accurate description of my family relationships I had ever heard. Marcus started outpatient therapy 3 times a week. I started my own weekly sessions with Dr. Martinez. We also began couples counseling with Dr. Chen every other week. It was expensive and time-consuming and emotionally exhausting. But for the first time in our marriage, we were building something real instead of just maintaining something functional. In my individual sessions, Dr. Martinez helped me understand the concept of emotional neglect and how it had shaped my entire approach to relationships. You learned early that love was conditional, she explained during our 3rd session. You got positive attention for being easy, for not needing things, for taking care of yourself and others. So you internalized the message that your worth was tied to your usefulness and your needs were inconvenient. But that's just being responsible, I protested. That's just being mature. There's a difference between age-appropriate responsibility and parentification, she said. Children should be encouraged to be independent, but they should also feel secure in asking for help when they need it. They should know that their parents will show up for them consistently, not just when it's convenient. She asked me to do an exercise. Write down every time I could remember asking my parents for help and receiving it without having to justify why I needed it more than Rebecca did. I sat with that assignment for a week. I filled 3 notebook pages with examples of times I'd needed support. But when I tried to identify instances where I'd received it unconditionally, the pages remained blank. That's not normal, Jessica, Dr. Martinez said when I showed her the results. That's neglect. The word hit me like a physical blow. Neglect. I'd always thought neglect meant not being fed or housed or clothed. I hadn't realized it could be emotional, subtle, harder to identify, but just as damaging. But they weren't abusive, I said. They never hit me or called me names or anything like that. Abuse isn't just what people do to you, she replied. Sometimes it's what they don't do, what they don't provide. Emotional neglect is the absence of adequate emotional support, attention, and validation during childhood. It's parents who are physically present but emotionally unavailable. Over the following weeks, she helped me understand how this neglect had affected every aspect of my adult life. My inability to ask for help, my tendency to overfunction in relationships, my attraction to people who needed caretaking, because that was the only kind of love I knew how to recognize. You learn to equate love with being useful, she said, so you've spent your whole life trying to earn affection through service instead of believing you deserve it just for being yourself. The work was painful and slow. Some days I left therapy sessions feeling worse than when I'd arrived, like Dr. Martinez had surgically opened wounds I'd spent decades learning to ignore. But gradually, I started to see patterns I'd been blind to for 28 years. Meanwhile, my family's attempts to contact me became increasingly desperate and manipulative. Rebecca called crying, telling me I was ruining her relationship with our mother. She's so upset about your fight that she can barely focus on helping me plan my move. You're being cruel, Jessica. This isn't like you. My mother sent a series of texts alternating between guilt and anger. I don't understand why you're being so cold. I'm your mother. Rebecca is crying every day because of how you've treated us. After everything I sacrificed to raise you, this is how you repay me? Fine. Be selfish, but don't come crying to me when you need something. Each message was like a scab being picked at, designed to make me doubt myself, to pull me back into the familiar role of the accommodating daughter who never caused problems. But Dr. Martinez had prepared me for this. When you start setting boundaries with people who are used to you having none, they'll escalate, she warned. They'll try harder to get you back into the old pattern because it was working for them. She taught me a phrase that became my lifeline. That's not my responsibility. Rebecca's emotional state, not my responsibility. My mother's disappointment in my choices, not my responsibility. Their financial difficulties or relationship problems or career struggles, not my responsibility. It felt revolutionary and terrifying at the same time. 6 weeks after Marcus's suicide attempt, my mother called with news that Rebecca had been evicted from her Seattle apartment for non-payment of rent. She needed immediate help, money for a new place, someone to co-sign a lease, assistance with moving expenses. I know you've been going through a rough patch, my mother said, as if Marcus's hospitalization and ongoing psychiatric care were equivalent to a minor case of the flu, but this is an emergency. Rebecca has nowhere to go. That sounds really difficult, I said, using the neutral response Dr. Martinez had taught me. Jessica, she needs help. We need to pull together as a family. I understand you're worried about her. What are her other options? What other options? You and I are her family. We're supposed to take care of each other. She's 25, Mom. She's an adult. She can figure out her housing situation like other adults do. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I don't understand what's happened to you, she said finally, her voice cold. You used to be such a caring person. You used to understand what family means. I do understand what family means, I replied. It means showing up when someone's husband nearly dies. It means caring about someone's pain even when it's inconvenient. It means treating all your children equally instead of having a favorite. That's not. Rebecca has always been more sensitive. And I've always been more useful. I know how this works, Mom. She hung up on me again. This time, I didn't feel the familiar panic that usually accompanied her anger. Instead, I felt something close to relief. I was finally saying the things I'd been thinking for decades but had never been brave enough to voice. 2 days later, Rebecca showed up at my door. I was making dinner when the doorbell rang. Marcus was upstairs in his office, working on a freelance project, his first since the hospitalization, a sign that he was starting to feel like himself again. When I opened the door, Rebecca was standing on my porch with 2 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside to let her enter, my mind racing. "What are you doing here?" "Mom bought me a plane ticket. I don't have anywhere else to go." She looked around our living room like she was seeing it for the first time, taking in the photos on the mantle, the books on the shelves, the dog toys scattered across the floor. Our life, built slowly and deliberately over 5 years of marriage. "Rebecca, you can't just show up here expecting to move in." "Why not? We're sisters. And you have a guest room." The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking, as if my home was just an extension of our family home, available whenever she needed it, as if my marriage and my recovery from trauma were secondary to her housing crisis. Because I didn't invite you. Because my husband is recovering from a suicide attempt and we need stability right now. Because showing up unannounced with luggage isn't how adult relationships work. Her face crumpled. I can't believe how selfish you've become. The old Jessica would have helped me. The old Jessica was a doormat who never learned to say no. Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by our voices. Everything okay down there? Rebecca looked up at him with the same manipulative expression she'd perfected as a child. Wide eyes, trembling lip, the picture of innocent vulnerability. Hi, Marcus. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. You're looking much better. Then, turning back to me. See? He's fine now. You could help me if you wanted to. That was the moment I truly understood how broken my family's dynamics were. Marcus had been suicidal 6 weeks ago. He was still fragile, still adjusting to new medications, still attending therapy 3 times a week. But to Rebecca, his recovery was just an obstacle to getting what she wanted from me. You need to leave, I said. Jessica, you need to leave right now. You can't stay here. This isn't your home, and you weren't invited. She started crying, the kind of dramatic sobbing that had always gotten her exactly what she wanted from our parents. I have nowhere to go. Mom said you'd help me. She said family takes care of family. Then she should have offered you her guest room instead of buying you a plane ticket to make me deal with your problem. I can't go back there. She's disappointed in me for getting evicted. She thinks I'm irresponsible. You are irresponsible. You're 25 years old and you've never held a job for more than 6 months. You've never paid rent on time. You've never had a budget or a savings account or any kind of plan beyond expecting other people to bail you out. Marcus had come downstairs and was standing behind me, a steady presence at my back. His support gave me courage to continue. I'm done being your safety net, Rebecca. I'm done being the responsible one who cleans up your messes. Find somewhere else to stay. She looked between me and Marcus, perhaps realizing for the first time that her usual tactics weren't going to work. Fine, she said, grabbing her suitcases. But don't come crawling back when you need something from us. I won't, I said. I've learned not to need things from people who aren't capable of giving them. After she left, I sat on my couch and shook for 20 minutes. Marcus held me while I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally standing up for myself and my marriage. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. That was really hard, but you did the right thing. It doesn't feel right. It feels terrible. That's because you've been trained to feel guilty for having boundaries. But Jess, you protected us. You protected our home and our recovery and our marriage. That's not selfish. That's healthy. Dr. Martinez helped me process the encounter during our next session. How did it feel to say no and stick to it, she asked. Awful, I admitted. Like I was being mean and cold and everything they said I was. That's the guilt talking. The voice you learned as a child that told you saying no made you a bad person. But let me ask you this. If a friend's sister showed up at their house unannounced during a family crisis and demanded to move in, what would you tell your friend to do? I thought about it. I'd tell them they had every right to say no. I'd tell them their marriage and their recovery came first. Exactly. You extended yourself the same courtesy you'd give a friend. That's not mean. That's self-respect. Over the following months, I started to experience something I'd never felt before. Peace in my own life. Without the constant drain of my family's emotional chaos, I had energy for things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I started reading for pleasure again. I took up gardening. Marcus and I began hiking together on weekends, exploring the trails around Boulder and Fort Collins. Our marriage, which I had thought was strong before, became genuinely intimate for the first time. Marcus learned to share his struggles instead of hiding them, and I learned to ask for support instead of carrying everything alone. We developed rituals of care. Saturday morning coffee dates where we checked in with each other, evening walks with Buster where we talked about our days, weekly date nights that were sacred and non-negotiable. The work wasn't easy. There were setbacks and difficult conversations and days when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But we were building something real together, something based on mutual support instead of one-sided caretaking. My relationship with my job improved too. I'd always been the person who said yes to everything, who stayed late without being asked, who took on extra projects to prove my worth. With Dr. Martinez's help, I started setting boundaries at work too. When my boss asked if I could take on a weekend consulting project that would have meant canceling our planned anniversary getaway, I said no. When a coworker tried to dump her responsibilities on me because she was overwhelmed, I referred her back to our supervisor instead of just absorbing the extra work. It felt revolutionary to prioritize my own needs alongside my responsibilities, to be good at my job without being a martyr to it. 3 months after Rebecca's visit, my mother called again. This time, her tone was different, smaller, more uncertain. "Jessica, I've been thinking about what you said, about how we've treated you over the years." Rebecca's therapist, she's seeing someone now about her housing issues and job problems. Anyway, her therapist suggested that maybe our family patterns weren't as healthy as I thought they were. I waited, not ready to make this easier for her. "I want to understand better," she continued. "I want to work on this, if you're willing. I found a therapist here in Phoenix who specializes in family dynamics. Would you be open to doing some sessions together? Maybe over video call?" It wasn't the apology I dreamed of as a child. It wasn't full acknowledgement of the decades of neglect and favoritism, but it was acknowledgement that there was a problem, that change was needed. "I'm willing to try," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand that I can't go back to the way things were. I can't be the one who gives everything and gets nothing. I can't be Rebecca's perpetual safety net. And I need you to respect that my marriage and my recovery are my priorities right now." "I understand," she said, "or I'm trying to. This is hard for me to hear that I might have gotten things wrong, but I want to try." We started family therapy sessions over video call. It was awkward and painful at first. My mother struggled to hear feedback about her parenting without becoming defensive. She had a hard time acknowledging the extent of the favoritism without making excuses about Rebecca's special needs and my apparent capability. But slowly, very slowly, she started to see the patterns Dr. Martinez and I had been discussing for months. How she'd taught me that love was conditional on being useful. How she'd failed to celebrate my successes while making excuses for Rebecca's failures. How she'd consistently prioritized Rebecca's comfort over my needs. "I thought I was helping you become independent," she said during one particularly difficult session. "I thought I was teaching you to be strong." There's a difference between teaching independence and emotional neglect, our family therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, explained. Children need to know they can count on their parents consistently, not just when they're convenient. Rebecca joined the sessions sporadically. She was living with my aunt in Tucson temporarily, working part-time at a coffee shop while trying to figure out her next move. Her participation was reluctant and defensive at first. She couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about family dynamics when she just needed practical support. But gradually, even she started to see how the family system had hurt both of us. She'd been enabled to the point of helplessness, never learning to cope with disappointment or solve her own problems because someone was always there to rescue her. I'd been neglected to the point of emotional isolation, never learning to ask for help because help was never reliably available. "I never realized you felt left out," she said during one session, tears in her eyes. "I always thought you were the lucky one. You had everything figured out. You didn't need help like I did." "I needed help," I said. "I just learned not to ask for it because asking meant being told that your crisis was more important than my emergency." It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Recovery wasn't linear. There were setbacks and misunderstandings and days when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves. My mother still struggled with treating us equally, still had a tendency to catastrophize Rebecca's problems while minimizing mine. Rebecca still had moments of entitlement, still expected others to solve problems she was capable of handling herself. But there was progress. Slow, imperfect, but real progress. My mother started checking in on me regularly, asking about my life without immediately pivoting to Rebecca's latest crisis. She celebrated my work promotion with genuine enthusiasm and sent flowers when Marcus and I celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary. She remembered the anniversary of his suicide attempt and called to see how we were both doing. Rebecca got a full-time job at a nonprofit arts organization in Tucson. It wasn't her dream job, but it was stable employment with benefits and a steady paycheck. She started saving money for the first time in her adult life. She moved into her own apartment, a modest studio she could afford on her salary, furnished with second-hand finds instead of expensive pieces my mother had previously bought for her. She even called to apologize for showing up at my house uninvited. "I realize now how inappropriate that was," she said. "I was so used to other people solving my problems that I didn't even consider that you had your own life and priorities." The apology meant more to me than I'd expected. Marcus continued to thrive in therapy. His depression was well managed with medication and regular sessions with Dr. Chen. He started a new job at a design firm that specialized in nonprofit branding, work that felt meaningful and used his creative skills. He took up photography as a hobby, capturing the landscapes we explored during our weekend hikes. Most importantly, he'd learned to share his struggles instead of carrying them alone. When he had a bad day, he told me about it instead of hiding it. When work stress triggered his anxiety, he used the coping skills he'd learned instead of isolating himself. We'd both learned that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. Our marriage had survived its darkest moment and emerged stronger, not because we'd avoided difficulty, but because we'd learned to face it together. A year after that first phone call in the hospital corridor, I found myself in a completely different place, literally and figuratively. Marcus and I had saved enough money to take a real vacation, our first since before his depression became severe. We were sitting on a beach in Maui, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of pink and orange. "Remember when you thought I was too strong to need you?" I asked him, my hand in his. He laughed, but gently. "Remember when you thought needing people made you weak?" We'd both learned so much about mental health and family dynamics and what real love looked like. About the difference between being strong and performing strength. About the courage it takes to be vulnerable with the people you trust. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thinking of you both. Hope you're having a wonderful time. Can't wait to hear about your trip when you're ready to share." No crisis. No request for help with Rebecca's latest problem. No attempt to make the conversation about anyone but us, just genuine interest in our happiness. It was such a small thing, but it represented a seismic shift in our relationship. Rebecca had texted earlier that day too. "Saw your beach photos on Instagram. Looks amazing. BTW, I got promoted to program coordinator at work. Taking myself out to celebrate tonight. Life is good." She was celebrating her own success instead of waiting for others to do it for her. She was solving her own problems and building her own life. It had taken her 26 years to get there, but she was finally becoming the independent adult my mother had always claimed she was helping her become. As for me, I was learning every day what it meant to be a whole person instead of a role, to have needs instead of just meeting them, to be loved for who I was instead of what I could provide. The woman who had stood in that hospital corridor a year ago, devastated by her mother's indifference while her husband fought for his life, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, not the performed strength of the perpetual caretaker, but the real strength that comes from knowing your worth and protecting it. I thought about all the people reading stories like mine on Reddit, recognizing themselves in the patterns of neglect and favoritism, the exhaustion of being the strong one, the loneliness of carrying everything alone. I wanted them to know what I was still learning myself, that you don't have to earn love through sacrifice, that you don't have to prove your worth through self-neglect, that asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. The day I stopped being the perfect daughter, I started becoming a real person. And that person, flawed, needy, complicated but authentic, turned out to be worth loving after all. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is believe you matter as much as everyone else. Sometimes healing begins the moment you stop making yourself small to make others comfortable. And sometimes the people who truly love you are the ones who never asked you to disappear in the first place. The sunset was fading now, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back two people who had learned to hold each other without losing themselves, to be strong without being silent, to love without drowning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing anything for anyone. I was just being myself, entirely and unapologetically, and it was enough. I was enough. I'd always been enough. Edit, thank you all for the incredible response to this post. I'm overwhelmed by your support and by how many people have shared similar experiences in the comments. For those asking about resources, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 988, and Psychology Today has an excellent therapist finder tool. To those struggling with family dynamics like mine, you're not crazy, you're not selfish for wanting better, and you deserve love that doesn't require you to earn it. Edit 2. A lot of people have asked about the financial aspect, since that came up in some of the comments. Yes, there was a money component I didn't detail fully. Over the years, I'd given my mother and Rebecca several $1,000s for various emergencies. But honestly, the financial exploitation was just a symptom of the deeper emotional neglect. The money hurt, but the dismissal hurt more. Edit 3. For those saying I was too harsh or that family is family, I understand that perspective comes from love, but it's also the same thinking that kept me trapped for 28 years. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is step away from relationships that are harming you, even if those relationships are with family. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to treat you poorly. Edit 4. Marcus wanted me to add that he's doing much better now. He's been stable on his medication for over a year, has a strong relationship with his therapist, and has developed healthy coping mechanisms for managing his depression. He also wanted to thank everyone for the kind messages about recovery. Mental health struggles are real, but they're treatable, and there's always hope.